How did Iran, a nation crushed by decades of sanctions and constant U.S. surveillance, manage to secretly build nuclear warheads right under the noses of the most powerful intelligence agencies on Earth? Last night, the Middle East didn't just explode, it descended into a full-scale nuclear apocalypse. In a chilling, ice-cold declaration from Tehran, Iran shocked the world by announcing that it now possesses fully operational nuclear warheads. But the horror had only just begun. A newly exposed secret dossier has uncovered undeniable traces of radioactivity, with every piece of evidence screaming one name: Pyongyang. North Korea's deadly fingerprints are all over this nightmare. Advanced nuclear technology and critical components have somehow slipped through the West's supposedly ironclad surveillance net, transforming Iran into a savage nuclear beast armed with razor-sharp fangs and lethal claws. Israel's guns are locked and loaded. Iran's finger is now hovering over the trigger. As these two mortal enemies stare each other down through the crosshairs of weapons of mass destruction, the entire planet stands just one heartbeat, one fatal miscalculation away from total catastrophe. Forget the pathetic diplomatic warnings and hollow moral lectures. How on earth did an Iran suffocated by decades of brutal sanctions and relentless surveillance manage to build a sophisticated nuclear arsenal right under the arrogant noses of American and Israeli intelligence? How deep and how dark is the forbidden alliance between Pyongyang and Tehran? And the question that should keep every leader awake at night: what happens when one side finally snaps and slams down the launch button? This is no longer a regional crisis. This is the moment the global order could be violently rewritten in radioactive fire and ash. In this video, we will tear apart the most nightmarish World War III scenario imaginable, from the shadowy black market smuggling routes that made the impossible possible to the exact second the first nuclear warhead rips across the skies of the Middle East, lighting up the horizon in apocalyptic fury. The age of empty threats and cheap bluffs is dead. Iran has flipped the entire table. What was once a controlled chessboard of pawns has now become a suicidal game of nuclear Russian roulette. And right now, all of humanity is staring directly into the abyss with no rope, no safety net, and no way back. In the shadowy world of intelligence operations, mistakes are not paid for with money, but with the collapse of entire empires like the Pentagon and Mossad. Those once arrogant machines that boasted they could see every square meter of the Earth through satellites and algorithms have now suffered a painful and humiliating blow of the era. While the supercomputers at Langley were still busy analyzing every crack in the publicly known nuclear facilities like Natanz or Fordow, Tehran had quietly orchestrated a masterful cicada-shedding-its-skin maneuver. They turned the West's multi-billion-dollar surveillance system into a collection of blind eyes. Iran was never naive enough to put all its eggs in one basket, as Western analysts had long imagined. For 2 decades, under the harshest sanctions, Tehran did not choose open confrontation on the surface. Instead, they dug deep, incredibly deep. They built an entire underground world that military experts call subterranean cities. These labyrinths penetrate the limestone mountain ranges of the Zagros, hard as steel. There, the uranium enrichment process no longer operates in the traditional way. Iran has severed nearly all external signal connections with the outside world. No internet, no radio waves, no heat signatures strong enough for American infrared sensors to detect. While International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors were still meticulously counting outdated centrifuges at the exposed facilities, the sharpest strategic minds of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had already moved the core of the program hundreds of meters underground. These are bunkers so fortified that even America's heaviest bunker buster bombs would only produce futile knocks on the massive steel doors. What intelligence circles are whispering about as the nuclear code is no exaggeration. It is the result of an extremely optimized technological process. The West had always believed Iran was still at least 2 to 3 years away from possessing a credible nuclear deterrent because they assumed Tehran could not solve the problem of warhead miniaturization. But that was a deadly miscalculation. A bulky nuclear bomb belongs to the thinking of the last century, suitable for superpowers that love to flex their muscles. A warhead weighing only a few hundred kilograms, small enough to fit on modern missiles, that is the weapon of those who dominate the game through silence and precision. Using self-developed composite materials and highly sophisticated metalworking techniques that Washington once thought Iran could never reach, Tehran has come very close to creating an ultra-compact detonator with destructive power equivalent to tens of thousands of tons of TNT. This means any mobile launcher currently hidden in Iran's mountain caves could become the trigger for an unpredictable geopolitical catastrophe. The United States and Israel are no longer facing a few fixed targets. They now stand before the prospect of numerous mobile deterrent capabilities that could emerge from anywhere. Why did Washington allow such a game-changing event to slip through its fingers? The answer lies in technological arrogance and Iran's profound strategic patience. Tehran transformed old mines and abandoned hydroelectric plants into ghost laboratories. They created fake electronic signals and deliberately leaked seemingly careless communications so that American listening posts would happily collect them. While Washington celebrated thinking it had blocked electronic components from Europe, Iran had already completed its network of transfers through third countries. Beneath those seemingly outdated machinery, shipments lay sophisticated processors and control systems. Tehran turned the blockade into a driving force for self-reliance. They no longer fully depended on imported centrifuges or Western components. They cast, manufactured, and operated everything in a closed-loop cycle so tight that even the densest spy networks found it nearly impossible to penetrate. The emergence of this nuclear code stands as ironclad proof of the profound failure of the maximum pressure strategy. The US and Israel had used every tool from the Stuxnet computer virus to assassinations targeting Iranian nuclear scientists in the heart of Tehran. But instead of breaking Iran's will, they only made the nation more cautious, more secretive, and far more dangerous. The message sent by Iran's leadership is no longer a plea for negotiation. It is the declaration of an actor that has prepared itself for the harshest scenarios. Revealing its deterrent capability precisely when the US-Israel alliance was intensifying, military pressure was a coldly calculated move down to every detail. It has transformed a conventional war into a nuclear chess game where a single wrong step by Washington could force all its allies in the Gulf to pay a devastating price. Tehran understands that in a world where international law is often twisted by the strong, the ultimate self-defense capability is the only shield protecting its sovereignty. They did not choose noisy desert tests that would give their opponents time to prepare. They revealed their hand when everything seemed on the verge of full readiness. That is the posture of a nation ready to go all the way if pushed into a corner. However, there is one question that experts cannot ignore. How could a country under total sanctions and near-constant surveillance achieve such a breathtaking leap in warhead miniaturization technology, one of the most difficult military secrets on the planet? Even a resilient Iran alone would struggle to complete the entire process in just a few short years. The smell of gunpowder and lingering traces of radioactivity at this moment seem to come not only from the deep bunkers in the Zagros Mountains. They also carry a familiar scent from Northeast Asia, from a nation that has lived for decades in confrontation with the United States and regards nuclear weapons as its ultimate lifeline for survival. As night falls over the mountain ranges of Central Asia, one of the most sophisticated military logistics operations in history operates in complete silence. The West has long prided itself on controlling global financial flows and goods movement, yet it overlooked a harsh law of survival. When cornered, determined nations will forge paths that no satellite or radar can reach. The specter of Pyongyang is no longer mere speculation. It has become a tangible force, quietly fueling the dynamics in the Middle East. American intelligence points to North Korea's involvement due to the striking similarities between the warhead designs Tehran has revealed and those previously seen in Pyongyang's missile programs. This is no coincidence. In the covert arms trade, North Korea functions not just as a country, but as a vast repository of nuclear expertise honed over decades under heavy sanctions. The transaction bypassed the international financial system entirely, relying instead on the classic and highly effective method of barter. Iran urgently needed advanced miniaturization technology and precision detonation techniques that North Korea had perfected through repeated testing. In return, Pyongyang gained energy resources, financial support, and most valuably real-world combat data from Iran's clashes with Western air defense systems. This created a symbiotic partnership between a military technology hub and a regional energy powerhouse. The critical question is how such sensitive components could penetrate the West's thick surveillance net. The answer lies in the art of concealment in broad daylight. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, working closely with North Korean intelligence, established a network of disguised civilian air transport. Aging cargo planes, flying under commercial pretexts, made repeated journeys from Pyongyang through Central Asian transit, points to discrete military zones near Tehran. Inside crates labeled as civilian equipment were disassembled parts of warhead systems and control circuits. Each flight carried only small portions, but hundreds of flights over many years assembled the complete structure. While America focused on ocean fleets, it neglected the vast skies of Central Asia, a dangerous blind spot in its monitoring system. Mossad, renowned for deep infiltration operations, was rendered completely ineffective this time. Communication between Tehran and Pyongyang avoided digital technology. Experts exchanged handwritten blueprints, physical models, and worked in isolated rooms completely shielded from electronic signals. The West could intercept signals from space, but it could not touch what happened deep inside the Zagros Mountains. The iron discipline of North Korea, combined with Iran's secretive operational style, created an almost impenetrable intelligence shield. While the West hunted for software traces, Iran completed its hardware using crude yet extremely effective methods. North Korea's assistance to Tehran was not only technical cooperation but also a shrewd geopolitical maneuver. By shifting technology, Pyongyang indirectly forced America to divert resources toward the Middle East, thereby reducing pressure on Northeast Asia. When America is dragged deeper into the Middle East, it will inevitably have to withdraw part of its forces and strategic assets from East Asia. At that moment, South Korea becomes significantly more vulnerable, its defense lines thinner, and its reliance on U.S. support exposed. This creates a golden window of opportunity for North Korea to act boldly, whether through heightened provocations, missile tests, or even limited military moves, without facing the full weight of American deterrence that has long kept the peninsula in check. The shift leaves Washington trapped in a painful dilemma. Attacking Iran risks triggering a reaction from Pyongyang, while inaction risks destabilizing its Gulf allies. In reality, the deterrent capability Iran has built bears the clear technical imprint of North Korea. It was designed for endurance, reliable operation, and the ability to survive modern defense layers. With this support, Iran has moved much closer to a state of strategic readiness. This places enormous pressure on Israel, as every military decision now carries the uncontrollable risk of escalation. The technology has been transferred, the systems are operational, and the fragile balance of power is being severely tested. The remaining question is not whether it will happen, but when the scenario spins out of control, who will take the first irreversible step, and how far the consequences will spread. In the dictionary of Mossad and the Israeli military, the word acceptance of defeat has never existed. Yet right now, inside the ultra-secret command bunkers of the Kiryat in Tel Aviv, the atmosphere is thick with unprecedented tension that feels suffocating. Iran's announcement of its nuclear capability is not merely a tough statement, it is a direct strike at the very foundation of Israel's survival. It has forced the entire Israeli security apparatus into a state of absolute high alert. While the West remains stunned, Tehran calmly asserts its position as a power that cannot be easily subdued, compelling its adversaries to shift into extreme and potentially uncontrolled responses. The Begin Doctrine has long served as Israel's guiding principle for decades. Never allow any rival to acquire weapons of mass destruction. But today, that doctrine faces its ultimate life-or-death test. Iran is no longer in a passive position. It has moved into a calculated, proactive strategic stance. For Israel's leadership, permitting Iran to accumulate deterrent power is simply unacceptable. A single nuclear strike on Tel Aviv could erase the entire structure of the Jewish state within minutes. Therefore, Israel finds itself compelled to act first, even though it fully understands that the price could be an irreversible catastrophe. Military sources indicate that squadrons of F-35 stealth fighters have been placed on the highest state of readiness, preparing for deep penetration missions thousands of kilometers into Iranian territory. They would have to confront Iran's multi-layered air defense network, which Tehran has quietly built and strengthened over many years. However, Iran is no longer the vulnerable target Israel faced in the past. Its strategic facilities have been dispersed, camouflaged, and protected inside extremely robust underground structures. Any preemptive strike now becomes an enormous gamble with increasingly slim chances of complete success. If Israel fails to neutralize Iran's full nuclear capability in the very first blow, the consequence will be a devastating chain reaction that goes far beyond any controllable scenario. Within Israel's military elite exists an ultimate contingency known as the Samson option, an extreme plan prepared for existential threats. In such a scenario, Israel's entire nuclear arsenal could be unleashed if the nation faces the risk of total annihilation. This is not merely a deterrent threat, but a chilling warning that if Israel falls, it will drag everything else down with it in a storm of indiscriminate destruction. Meanwhile, Iran maintains the initiative through a multi-layered strategy. It combines the power of ballistic missiles and UAVs with a network of proxy forces that encircle Israel from multiple directions. Hezbollah in the north, Hamas in the south, and Iran-backed groups in Syria form a ring of fire that steadily tightens Israel's strategic space. This constant pressure wears down even the most advanced defense systems hour by hour. Faced with this pressure, Israel is forced to escalate its firepower, shifting from defense to increasingly intense preemptive strikes. Yet every blow brings the region closer to a point of no return. The world watches every radar signal with bated breath, because even a small miscalculation or a misunderstood order could trigger an uncontrollable chain of reactions. Iran has proven an ability to endure and adapt far beyond all predictions. It has turned pressure into momentum and forced its opponents to reveal their own limits. Israel is no longer confronting just one country, but an entire strategic system built over decades with frightening depth and determination. When pushed to the wall, every choice becomes extreme and carries the color of life and death. And when the boundaries blur, the question is no longer who wins or loses, but whether humanity can withstand the consequences of a single mistake that could ignite a nuclear storm across the entire planet. Imagine the position of a nation that has been strangled by sanctions, suffocated for decades, and hunted for its brightest scientific minds for half a century. When overwhelming forces from across the ocean and regional adversaries relentlessly push it against the wall, the only remaining choices are surrender or standing tall with unbreakable will to protect its people and sovereignty. For Tehran, pressing the button in such a moment would not be an act of aggression, but a legitimate act of survival, a justified response from a resilient nation facing prolonged hegemonic pressure. In recent days, the reality has clearly exposed repeated attacks targeting civilian infrastructure, sources of livelihood, and the sovereignty of an independent country. Iran has exercised restraint to the absolute limit, but every limit has its breaking point. When enemy fighter squadrons carrying the threat of nuclear escalation approach its airspace, Tehran would have no strategic space left to retreat. At that point, the order from the supreme leader would not stem from recklessness, but from the solemn command to defend territory, faith, and national honor. In this scenario, underground missile silos would awaken simultaneously. Warheads carrying the symbols of self-reliance and determination would rip through the skies, heading straight toward key enemy military command centers and deployment bases. The moment the launch command is issued, defense systems once praised as invincible would reveal their true limitations against a counterstrike accumulated over decades. No shield could fully stop a will that has been suppressed and forged for half a century. Missiles with unpredictable trajectories and high penetration capabilities would exploit every blind spot in the surveillance network, drastically shortening the enemy's reaction time. Within minutes, critical command hubs would be paralyzed, leadership structures crippled, and the balance of power dramatically reversed. This would not be meaningless destruction, but a forced reshaping of the regional order from the perspective of a nation compelled to defend itself. Not only direct targets, but any military platform serving the aggression would become legitimate objectives. Tehran has clearly stated that any base supporting an attack on Iran would be fair game. As enemy fleets come under unprecedented pressure, the image of an untouchable superpower would be brutally challenged. This serves as a clear warning. No nation can impose its will through force without paying a heavy price. Iran is not reaching out to start a war, it is only focusing on threats directed at its own doorstep. While the West worries about radioactive fallout, history records that previous battlefields have already been poisoned by other weapons. In the scenario where Tehran fires, a chain reaction would be difficult to avoid. Yet Iran's position at that moment would be that of a people ready to endure anything to protect their sovereignty. Iranian society has long prepared for the harshest contingencies, with extensive underground shelter systems and an iron spirit tempered through generations. Societies accustomed to comfort and stability, however, might fall into shock when facing a total crisis. The internal shifts triggered by such a clash would ultimately decide the long-term outcome. After such a collision, the regional order would be rewritten. The presence of external forces would be called into question, and many countries would reassess the balance of power. Iran's action in this scenario would carry not only military significance, but also a powerful signal about the right to self-determination of nations that refuse to be dictated to. Nuclear capability, viewed this way, becomes more than a tool. It stands as a symbol of strategic autonomy. History may one day record that when driven to the brink, Iran chose to stand firm and forced its opponents to confront the consequences of their own decisions. Justice in war always comes with a harsh cost, and sometimes that cost is the violent shaking of an entire region's skies. Iran does not seek conflict, but it stands ready to face it if forced, with the resolve of a steadfast nation. To some, this step may appear controversial, but for those who value true independence, it represents a powerful affirmation of the will to exist. However, this scenario does not end with one side alone. The adversary would certainly refuse to accept defeat, and the danger of extreme escalation would remain ever present, opening a chain of reactions that the entire region might struggle to contain. For years, the world has been covered by glossy layers of rhetoric about self-defense. But when we look directly at the core, that facade collapses, revealing a cold and ruthless reality. When a power is backed into a corner and its hegemonic calculations are shattered by unbreakable determination, its choice is rarely retreat. Instead, it drags everything into the abyss with it. The Samson option is not merely a military doctrine, but the desperate reflex of an entity that refuses to lose control. It is prepared to plunge the entire region into disaster just to cling to its slipping dominance. In this context, with Iran's deterrent capability locking down the enemy's war command centers, Israel's elite leadership is pushed to the most extreme limit. They stand ready to unleash their entire hidden nuclear arsenal stored in deep underground bunkers and on strategic sea-based platforms. This would no longer be a conventional military response, but an act of widespread annihilation that surpasses every norm of warfare. Unlike Iran's targeted defensive approach, the scenario from Israel aims for maximum thermal and shockwave destruction on a massive scale, turning vast areas into seas of fire. Millions of innocent civilians would become victims of a decision made in the midst of a power crisis, where fear of losing position overwhelms all moral boundaries. In that scenario, the role of the United States would not remain on the sidelines. Washington, with its positioning, reconnaissance, and technical support systems, would become a key factor in enhancing the effectiveness of the strikes, creating a cold coordination between raw power and ambition. For them, maintaining geopolitical influence could be placed above any humanitarian cost. This is where the most extreme logic of power reveals itself, human lives reduced to expendable variables. Once the nuclear rain is unleashed, the consequences would not stop at the regional level. Radioactive dust would spread through atmospheric currents, impacting global ecosystems, threatening food supply chains, and shaking the very foundations of the world economy. A dangerous precedent would be set. The ultimate weapon used not for deterrence, but for suppression. Cities engulfed in nuclear light would become indelible memories for humanity. Yet even in the most brutal circumstances, Iran's spirit would remain unbroken. Deep beneath hundreds of meters of rock, protective forces and scientific teams would continue operating final response systems, prepared for the worst possible situations. They understand they stand on the front line of a struggle that goes far beyond territorial defense. It is a fight to protect strategic autonomy against external imposition. If this extreme scenario is triggered, it would mark not only the end of one era, but also the unmasking of the true nature of those forces that claim to uphold order while preserving their own power. Though the losses could be immense, the image of a resilient Iran would become a lasting symbol of unyielding will. A people that can endure devastating blows without losing its identity or determination to safeguard its sovereignty. History always remembers such moments when material strength clashes with the power of human resolve. An aggressor may destroy physical infrastructure, but it can never extinguish a nation's thirst for existence. And it is precisely from the ashes of such conflict that a new order may emerge, one where power is no longer based on unilateral imposition. This would not merely mark the end of countless lives, but also sound the death knell for the entire global financial system, which has long been built upon decades of imposition and exploitation. A world that once ran on the steady flow of oil from Iran and the Gulf region, along with the absolute dominance of the US dollar, would suddenly plunge into an economic abyss with no bottom in sight. This is the brutal price that the US-Israel alliance would have to face, for choosing to use force to crush the pride and self-respect of a resilient nation. Look at the global energy map. The Strait of Hormuz is the vital artery sustaining the industrial machines from Asia to Europe. When Iran exercises its legitimate right of self-defense through counterstrikes targeting opposing forces, this area would instantly turn into a no-go zone. No oil tanker, no insurance company would dare venture into waters contaminated by radiation and filled with extreme risks. Between 20 and 30% of the world's oil supply would vanish overnight, and this time there would be no quick recovery scenario. Major oil fields in Saudi Arabia and the UAE, once used as launch pads for military operations, would suffer severe disruption, bringing extraction almost to a standstill. Oil prices would no longer be measured in numbers, but would become a scarce resource far beyond any forecast. Western economies, heavily dependent on cheap energy, would begin to collapse under shortages never seen before. The very foundation of American power, tied to the petrodollar system, would be shaken to its core as oil flows are severed. When the international community realizes the consequences of these coercive decisions, confidence in the dollar would crumble rapidly. Financial markets in New York and London would witness free falls in moments, with trillions in asset value wiped out, while Western banking systems face a domino effect. Citizens in developed countries would suddenly understand that the figures in their accounts offer no protection against a real crisis. A massive wave of de-dollarization would spread across the globe, triggering an unprecedented financial earthquake. This would go far beyond traditional sanctions. It would be the direct result of Tehran's fierce resistance against prolonged pressure. As the Middle East descends into chaos, the entire global supply chain from Asia to Europe would fracture. Factories across Europe would halt due to energy shortages. Distribution systems in the United States would run empty as strategic sea lanes are paralyzed. The consumption model built on cheap resources would collapse entirely. A food and goods crisis would sweep through developed economies, forcing societies used to abundance to confront a harsh new reality. In such turmoil, only nations with strong internal resilience and self-sufficiency would maintain stability. New economic linkages would emerge as countries staying out of the conflict seek to build independent payment systems free from dollar dominance. Although Iran might suffer damage to its infrastructure, its position as a determined nation would allow it to become one of the centers of a new regional economic order. Many countries would look toward Tehran as a symbol of autonomy and the ability to withstand external pressure. A model based on respect for sovereignty rather than enforcement through strength would gradually take shape from these upheavals. The economic collapse would not be limited to numbers on screens, but would represent a profound shift in global thinking. The world would realize that the model of endless consumption sustained by conflict has pushed the planet to a dangerous limit. In this context, Iran's role would go beyond defending its territory. It would force the international community to re-examine the entire current power structure. Every dollar from now on would carry the memory of an era of instability created by misguided decisions. This is the price that forces of imposition must pay: declining influence and a harsh judgment from history. As the economic black hole expands, structures once thought unbreakable would gradually crumble, leaving space for new orders to form. Iran would not only defend itself with strength, but also help break the long-standing unfair financial constraints. However, in this chaos, the choices made by other major powers would be decisive, as their reactions would shape the future of the entire international system and the very possibility of a post-crisis world. I must emphasize one crucial point. The conflict involving Iran will not be resolved in a matter of weeks or even months. This confrontation has the potential to drag on for many years, evolving into a prolonged war of attrition, far more devastating than what the world has witnessed in recent regional conflicts. The consequences would be immense. We are looking at a war of exhaustion on a scale much larger than the Ukraine conflict. Energy markets, global shipping routes, and entire supply chains would be shaken to their foundations, sending shockwaves across every continent. Oil prices would remain volatile for years, inflation would spiral in many economies, and food security for billions of people could be threatened by disrupted fertilizer and grain shipments. Let me analyze this in depth. The United States risks being pulled into a new quagmire in the Middle East, and unlike previous engagements, this time there may be no easy exit strategy. America would face a grinding, multi-front struggle that slowly drains its resources, political will, and international standing. Washington essentially faces two painful choices: each carrying heavy costs. If the United States chooses to continue escalating the conflict, it would become deeply mired in a costly military campaign. Sustaining large-scale operations, protecting allies, and maintaining naval presence in the Gulf would require enormous financial outlays, potentially trillions of dollars over time. This endless spending would strain the federal budget, increase national debt, and divert resources away from domestic priorities and other strategic. Moreover, prolonged involvement would severely damage America's global credibility, portraying it as an aggressor unable to achieve decisive victory despite its overwhelming military superiority. Public opinion at home and abroad would turn sharply against such a war, further isolating the United States diplomatically. On the other hand, if America decides to withdraw or seek negotiations, the repercussions would be equally damaging to its long-term position. Its influence over the Gulf Cooperation Council (GCC) countries, particularly Saudi Arabia and the UAE, would weaken significantly. These key partners might begin to question Washington's reliability as a security guarantor and look for alternative arrangements. The petrodollar system, which has underpinned American economic dominance for decades, would face serious challenges as oil trade patterns shift away from dollar dominance. Confidence in the US dollar could erode rapidly, accelerating de-dollarization trends already visible in parts of the world. This creates a classic dilemma with no good options. The United States finds itself trapped in a complex web of interests and commitments that it helped create but can no longer easily escape. This network includes the survival of the petrodollar system, deep strategic relationships with GCC nations, security commitments to allies in East Asia such as Japan and South Korea, and constant pressure from European partners who depend on stable energy supplies and fear regional spillover. In the end, America would not simply be fighting a war in the Middle East. It would be entangled and constrained by the very global power structure it built over many decades. Every move, whether aggressive escalation or reluctant de-escalation, would come at a steep price, gradually undermining the foundations of its superpower status. The longer the conflict persists, the clearer it becomes that the United States is no longer fully in control of the game it once dominated. For decades, the world has operated under the shadow of two nuclear superpowers, the United States and Russia, entities that position themselves as the ultimate arbiters of global destiny. But when Tehran dramatically reveals its deterrent capability, the entire geopolitical chessboard undergoes a profound shift. For the first time in modern history, powers possessing arsenals capable of destroying the planet must now pause and show caution before the unyielding will of a determined nation. Washington finds itself in an unprecedented strategic crisis, one that no Pentagon war game had fully anticipated. Symbols of American might, aircraft carriers and stealth fighters, suddenly appear far less effective against an opponent willing to risk everything to defend its sovereignty. The U.S. leadership is caught in a painful bind, escalating further risks, triggering an uncontrollable chain reaction, while stepping back would mean surrendering its long-held position as global hegemon. The myth of an unchallenged superpower begins to crack, as reality demonstrates that neither advanced technology nor financial dominance can subdue an iron will. Meanwhile, Moscow and Beijing observe the situation with calm, calculated detachment. They recognize that Iran is performing part of the difficult task of breaking the encirclement of Western power in the Middle East. Indirect diplomatic and informational support has created a strategic buffer, allowing Tehran to stand firm under intense pressure. Russia sees in Iran a valuable partner for rebalancing the international order, while also using the opportunity to strengthen its influence elsewhere. As America becomes deeply entangled in this crisis, the global balance of power starts to tilt. Military alliances once considered rock solid begin to waver as nations realize that the protective umbrella is no longer absolute. Many countries are now forced to reassess their strategic choices, moving away from total dependence on Washington toward more balanced alternatives. Iran's assertion of its nuclear deterrent has cast serious doubt on traditional security doctrines. A genuine multipolar order is emerging, one where strength is measured not only by resources or weapons, but by willpower and the capacity to endure hardship. Iran has proven that even a heavily sanctioned nation can alter the behavior of superpowers if it maintains strategic resolve and long-term vision. The era of unilateral decision-making over the fate of the world is coming to an end. Any future intervention must now account for risks that can spiral beyond control. The globe no longer revolves around just a few centers of power. it is shifting toward new anchors nations bold enough to stand up and defend their sovereignty. Superpowers are being forced to learn the art of respect and negotiation rather than imposition, because any misstep could lead to irreversible consequences. While the risk of further escalation remains real, the restraint of those in power may still prevent total catastrophe. In this turbulent landscape, Iran rises as a new center of influence and a powerful symbol of steadfastness and resilience in the face of extreme pressure. After this crisis, Tehran's position will be reinforced as a key pillar not only in the region but across the broader global stage. Future generations will remember this period as the moment when old boundaries were shattered and a new world order began to take shape amid intense upheaval. The Middle East, long viewed as a hotspot of conflict, is transforming into the arena where the global balance of power is being redefined. Iran's deterrent capability, in this light, serves not merely as a military tool, but as a force creating a new equilibrium. Justice in international relations is gradually moving away from domination by the strong and becoming linked to the genuine right of self-determination. Before a people ready to defend every inch of their land, all instruments of coercion reveal their limitations. Truth always rises above layers of media narrative. And the fundamental question remains: who brought the conflict to this point and who stood up to protect their rightful sovereignty? So, in the current atmosphere of rising tension and escalation, do you believe a new world order is truly taking shape, or will humanity continue to be drawn into an endless cycle of confrontation? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this analysis valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to the Jiang Xueqin channel so you won't miss future developments. For now, thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next update.